Hi there, this is John Lebensold for KillerPHP.com, and today what I'm going to be doing is looking at DOM manipulation, so how we can actually manipulate the HTML on our page using a bit of jQuery. So in this example, I'm going to start off by just actually clearing what we did in the last example. So we're going to delete our style tag here. We're going to get rid of our container class here. We're going to get rid of all of this that we've got right here. And all of this code that we wrote in the last example, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm also going to get rid of the loading of the jQuery UI library, since we're not going to use that, or the font size variable. And lastly, I'm just going to change the title of this project to DOM manipulation. So what you're seeing right now is a very simple HTML page, similar to the one we started with in the last, or actually in the first video in this series. If I refresh this page again, we should just get DOM manipulation. Nothing too fancy. Actually, before I get carried away, I'm going to save this file as, you guessed it, DOM manipulation. Okay, so with this in place, one of the most common uses for manipulating HTML is dealing with things like data grids. And we're going to be doing some pretty neat stuff with events, which you're going to see very shortly. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a hyperlink called of class type new row. And this will make sense in just a minute. Then I'm going to create a table with an ID called data table, where we're going to have some fictional data. We're going to have a table row, and inside it we'll have a table heading of title, another table heading of description, and a final table heading of edit. Oops. And just save that. So the idea here is that when I click on the hyperlink new row, we are supposed to get new table rows with relevant data underneath the title, description, and edit. If I refresh this again, oops, go to DOM manipulation. Then I've got this new row button that doesn't do anything right now, and then I've got a table with title, description, and edit. So far, it's not very interesting, but it will get interesting, I promise. So I'm going to start by creating a function, and this function is going to be called getRow. And what getRow is going to do is it's going to return a string, and this string is going to be our table row. So I'm going to have some item in here inside of a cell, whoops, and then we're going to have a new table cell with a description, and lastly we're going to have a table cell here with a hyperlink with delete, whoops, and a hyperlink going to the pound with an X, and we're going to close that table cell, and then we're going to close that table row, and lastly that string. So let me just explain this for a second. We've got a table row here. If I was going to format this properly, it would look something like this. But the reason I'm putting it all on one line is because with JavaScript, you can't have strings on multiple lines unless you do something like escape it with \n\, which isn't really nice. And because it's not very much HTML, I'm just going to stick it all on one line because it'll keep it nice and simple. I'm going to show you a quick Firebug trick right now. So if I go back here and I refresh this, nothing will happen. But if I go back to Firebug and I type getRow, just over here on the right hand side, and then I click on run, you'll see that it'll actually return the HTML that comes from the function getRow that we've defined, which is kind of neat. We're going to use this later on. So now that we've got our Google onload callback stuff, I'm going to create a click event, which will be of type new row. We've already done this a couple times, so I'm just going to run through it as quickly as possible. So we have a click event for new row. Doesn't do anything yet, but we're going to grab a row template, which will come from getRow. Now you could imagine that if I put in some arguments here, some parameters, that I could actually pass them into my template, and then my template could have all kinds of relevant data. So we're going to look at that a little later on, but not in this tutorial, since this one is primarily focused with manipulating the document object model. And then I'm going to have a variable here called delete hyperlink. Now, actually, let's do that afterwards. First, let's just get this thing appending our rows to the table. Let's keep this nice and simple. So I'm going to say data table, and this is the same thing as doing document.getElement by ID, except this is the jQuery way of doing it. So we're just using the pound symbol, which is equivalent in CSS, append, and here we want to grab the row template. So that should work, theoretically. If I refresh this and I click on new row, you'll see that we're starting to get a data grid with some item, description, and then these little X's on the right. So we need to attach listeners to these X's. But what's interesting about these X's is they don't actually exist when we create the page. So it's not as simple as just saying, you know, dot delete, dot click, and then delete, and then it'll be fine. We have to attach them when we create them. We have to attach listeners to bits of HTML that haven't actually been written yet, which is a little tricky. But again, jQuery makes this pretty painless. All we have to do is create a new variable, and we'll call this one delete hyperlink. And here, instead of just appending a bunch of HTML to our data table, I'm going to say row template. Now you'll notice that I'm taking HTML data and I'm passing it inside the jQuery function. And what this does is it turns it into a jQuery object, which means it behaves exactly like a jQuery object. So I can traverse it, I can manipulate it, I can attach events to it, I can do all sorts of things. So inside this row template, which isn't on our page yet, there's this class called delete. And I want to attach a listener to it. So I'm going to say row template dot find dot delete. So now we've found it, we've got it. Dot click function. And then I'm just going to open it up and do this dot parent dot parent dot remove. Right? So this might seem a little strange, but what we're doing is we've basically attached onto the delete class here an event, a click event. And now this click event is going to go up to its table cell, which is the parent, and then the parent of the table cell is the table row. And we're just going to remove it. And then we can, of course, return false. So now we have this delete hyperlink variable. And the delete hyperlink variable is associated with the little X over here, right? Because we're finding this little key called of type class delete. But we want to append the whole row. So just like here, we go up the DOM, we go up 2 steps. We're going to have to do the same thing when we append. So I'm going to say delete hyperlink dot parent dot parent. So if you can imagine that there's this whole jQuery object that's being created, But this variable only refers to a little subset of that, to that delete item. And so now when we go back here and we want to append it, we have to go up 2 stops to the table row. So if I refresh this again, and I create a whole bunch of new rows, I can actually delete them without any problem. And this way we only attach the event listeners when we need to. And we did this all with less than 10 lines of code, which is also kind of cool. So that's some introduction into DOM manipulation. And the next step is we're going to be looking at how we can incorporate Ajax into this project. Thanks for listening.